Okay, guys, we're going to get started. It's 3 o'clock, and that's when we're scheduled to start. And we've got 5 bill hearings today, and we are going to start with Senator Jackson, Senate Bill 77. And you don't have any designated sponsor panel, so you've got unlimited time to present your bill. Senate Bill 77, Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Education, Energy, and Environment Committee. Thank you for having me here today. Senator Michael Jackson, District 27, representing Calvert, Charles, and Prince George's counties, on behalf of Senate Bill 77. Senate Bill 77 is a straightforward piece of legislation that requires, and Mr. Chairman, if I might, when the bill was drafted, there are some minor errors there, some inconsistencies, and so you'll receive some amendments, hopefully as early as tomorrow morning, regarding that. So it's going to require MDEM, Maryland Department of Emergency Management, to create an extreme weather mitigation and preparation grant program for homeowners, local governments, and nonprofit organizations to assist with paying for water-related damage related to extreme weather events. The legislation also creates a $5 million annual appropriation to provide grants to those served by the program. Again, not DHCD, but MDEM will be charged with implementing and administering the program, applying for federal grants that could be used for related causes, creating a list of contractors specializing in extreme weather mitigation, and inspecting related work for recipients of grant funding. Homeowners will be eligible for the grant program if they suffer extreme weather-related damage, and if the property for which they are applying is the homeowner's primary legal residence, owned and occupied by the homeowner, a single-family home, a townhouse, or a row house, and covered by an up-to-date homeowner's insurance policy meeting specified criteria. Grants awarded to the individual homeowners will be capped at $5,000, and matching grants made available to local governments and nonprofits to provide like funding would be capped at $50,000 for a single grant, or $250,000 total for the fiscal year. This legislation simply would help to ensure that those dealing with damages related to severe weather events are able to make themselves whole for damages that are proven uncovered by insurance. As time passes, extreme weather events are becoming more and more prevalent due to the clear impacts of climate change. This legislation will simply provide for homeowners, local governments, and nonprofit organizations to adequately respond to the public health impacts that these events create. So with that, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, again, there will be some amendments because of some inconsistencies with drafting. We're asking for a favorable report, and I'll stand for a few questions if you have them.
Okay, any questions for the sponsor, Senator Jackson? We've got Senator Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Jackson, great to see you.
You as well.
So did you see the favorable amendment from MACO?
Yes.
And is that addressed? Are you comfortable with what they've been saying in there, where they ask questions about high-density housing being excluded and stuff?
Yes.
You're good with that?
I am good with that. I just spoke to Mr. Canali from MACO.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good. And it was the same thing with the realtors, where they also had some questions. It looked like some definitional questions. Did they get that information to you before?
I believe they gave it to the original sponsor. This bill was sponsored last year without a cross-file. I think Delegate Ivy received those. I did receive word that there were some matters. And again, those are part of the inconsistencies that we're trying to clear up.
Okay, very good. I just want to make sure that you had a chance to respond.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, any additional questions? We've got Senator Hester and then Senator Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the great bill, Senator. I was just curious if you'd seen the note from the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. It
Yes.
basically lists the many other funds that are available, but it doesn't really come in pro or con on this specific one. So I'm wondering if there's any conversations you've had offline which you could enlighten us.
Yesterday afternoon, myself and the House sponsor had a conversation with Ms. Sierra from MDEM regarding the matter. This is a letter of information. We had that conversation yesterday. They did not come in with a position at all, and so we'll see what happens.
Okay, Senator Washington.
Thank you. I really appreciate this bill. I just have a question about the local government or nonprofit is eligible. Is it that are local governments or nonprofits able to disperse funds? So would they create their own, is it the idea that they could set up their own extreme weather mitigation program within the county and then
Yes, and
provide sub-awards?
yes, thank you, Madam Senator. What's unique about the origin of this bill is that it comes from Prince George's County, where there are 27 municipalities.
Right, yeah.
And so there are challenges within our county sometimes with resources that come into the county, so.
And are there similar programs that provide this type of aid to local jurisdictions? Are there existing programs?
We do, the most recent, I think we all are familiar with, it's the Ellicott City with the flooding there. And so this is seeking to mirror it. I know that there is one of the municipalities in the county, I think Mount Rainier, may have received some funding. I'm not sure if it came from, we're not sure if it came from the Ellicott City funding or if there was something else that they used, so.
And I just don't remember. How much is the annual appropriation for the Ellicott City version? If this is what I'm just trying to.
No, not necessarily modeling it, but it was just the extenuating circumstances during any hard rain. So I think this was the inspiration, the impetus for it.
Okay,
Yeah, so,
okay. All righty, great, thank you.
thank you.
Okay, well, I did have one question. How'd you come up with the threshold, this 80% income threshold, up to 80% of area median income? What's the rationale of that particular specific number?
I am believing that the threshold, because of the income levels throughout the municipalities that are in our jurisdiction, and hopefully Senator Augustine can kind of help me with this. So we have a cluster, we have 27 municipalities in the county, and oftentimes when funding comes into the county, having worked for county agencies for a bit, the disbursement of funding that goes to jurisdictions within the county is sometimes, I think sometimes some jurisdictions don't get some of the funding that's coming in. And so I believe that that's the 80%. I think that would meet the threshold that's needed for those that are inside the Beltway, quite near Senatorial District 47 primarily, but in other areas as well, where you have a cluster of municipalities.
Okay, I mean, just so we get it, if you ponder that a little bit, if you can get us some information where that, again, that's a
That 80%
very
piece.
specific number, and there's probably some objective reason, that
Gotcha.
we could point to. Any additional questions for the sponsor? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Senator Jackson.
Thank you very much.
We only have one other witness. Speaking of MACO, we do have Kevin Canale from MACO, signed up favorable with amendments. And you've got, Kevin, you got 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Kevin Canale here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in support of Senate Bill 77 with the previously discussed amendment. We know that extreme weather events are becoming more and more common. I agree with Senator Jackson that this should be probably housed in MDEM. Counties and municipalities have a very good relationship with MDEM. They're very familiar with these kind of programs and work very closely with the local governments and nonprofits. Our amendment is to expand the bill in terms of its eligibility to include multifamily housing, so multifamily units. We just want to make sure that as many people are eligible as possible for this. Affordable housing is a big deal. We're trying to do everything we can to mitigate this at the local level, so we think expanding this program and its eligibility would behoove everyone. And so with what hopefully is a friendly amendment, we'd support the bill, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Any questions for Mr. Canale? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 77. We're going to now go to Senator McCray, Senate Bill 44. And Senator McCray, you do have two designated folks to be on your sponsor panel. We've got Kevin O'Keefe, who I did see in the audience. Kevin, why don't you come up, and Michael McHale. And so why don't you both take a seat next to Senator McCray. And Senator McCray, you've got the time you need to present Senate Bill 44.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Vice Chair, all members of EEE. For the record, Corey McCray, Senator for the 45th Legislative District, and here before you in reference to Senate Bill 44. Senate Bill 44 is not something that's new to the committee, maybe new to a couple of the members on the committee, but we've, over the years, have done electrical licensure. And electrical licensure is currently through its process. We watched it December 31st. A number of the folks were influxing to get their application in order to receive that licensure. But there was one issue that was very prevalent and kept coming up. It was the folks that held a master's license, but they had shelved their license. And for folks that's in the industry, we know that many folks shelve their license because they're not currently pulling permits. They're probably working for some employer or things of that nature. So they're really working as a journeyman, not as the master electrician pulling the permits and things like that from that standpoint. When we went to the agency to figure out how to address this issue, the agency said that there were two channels or paths forward that you can address this issue. Either they activate their license, which is why they shelved their license because they didn't want to continue to pay the insurance piece because they weren't paying permits, or they had to go on to the employer that they were working for, their insurance. And the electrical profession is a little bit different than, let's say, government from that standpoint. While sometimes folks may be last in is last out. In the electrical profession is you have to have a certain level of skill set and you have to have a certain level of output each and every day, or you may be laid off depending on how the workload is. So the reality that the employer will put you on their insurance isn't a reality for many of the folks that are working within the respective craft. So once identifying that this was an issue, and I think that the agency was trying to communicate that, they weren't articulating it in the best form or fashion last year, the way it would be well understood because they also weren't in the profession. But the thing was, like, how are we dealing with the folks that had master's license with shelf licenses? And they kept bringing up uninsured and uninsured and uninsured. So we huddled everybody together, a number of the stakeholders, the umbrella groups, the agency itself, to be able to understand, like, what is the path forward. And with this bill, they would then create a classification for the folks that pretty much have shelved licenses to recognize that they are uninsured, but they still have the capabilities of working as a journeyman electrician for a company from that standpoint. That is the bill in totality, Mr. Chairman. And DLS had one technical piece of it that's also within inside the bill. So.
Okay, before we go to the witnesses, any questions for the sponsor, Senator McCray? Okay, seeing none. Next up, let's go to Kevin O'Keefe. Why don't you go next, and then we'll end up with Mr. McHale.
Thank you.
You've got 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Feldman, members of the committee. My name's Kevin O'Keefe. I'm here on behalf of the Independent Electrical Contractors Chesapeake, which is headquartered in Laurel, Maryland, and has about 120 members, entities, and has an extensive apprenticeship training program approaching 1,000 apprentices. And we support this bill. We've been trying to get it for about a decade, trying to get a statewide journey person electrician license, which we did. Senator McCray led the charge 2 years ago. That passed. There was clarifying legislation last year on an issue, and this year's legislation is just meant as the simplest way, as Senator McCray said, is if you're a master electrician, but you're not keeping that license active, this allows you in an uninsured status to work for an electrician or electrical company as a journey person. So it addresses the issue, people that have the experience and the talent can continue to work. So for that reason, we support this, and hopefully you give it a favorable report.
Okay, Mr. McHale, why don't you go next, and then we'll open up for questions.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Mike McHale. I'm the business manager of IBEW Local 24. The IBEW has 16 local unions in Maryland. There's 11,000 people, Maryland residents, that belong to those local unions. Ours is the second largest. We're headquartered in Baltimore City. I'm here today because I am one of the people that are affected by this license. I've been in the trade 38 years, started as an apprentice, was a journeyman, and then became a master about 18 years ago. The way the system used to work, you could take the state test, which is what I took, and you still couldn't pull permits unless you activated a county license. And the county that you activated your license in made you get the insurance and the bonding for that license. If you weren't going to be pulling permits, you did not get insured at that county, and the state didn't follow up. You get in trouble if you try to pull a permit. So the license came through. I was what was called registered inactive. I have been active at different points in my career, but it's not necessary with this job. The test isn't easy, by the way. It's a pretty difficult test, and it's hard to get that license. So currently, to Senator McCrae's point, the new licensing made it so that I could become a journeyman wireman again, or pay the insurance and the bonding for the license, but I'm not doing the work of the trade right now. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them, and with that, I'd ask you to support the bill as submitted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both for your testimony. Any questions for either of our witnesses? Senator Augustine.
Thanks. Just for my understanding, the entity that the individual who is going to have this new license classification of uninsured, the entity that they will be working for will be insured, though. Is that correct?
Yes, that's very correct. So they will be working for an electrical contractor in order to, that is insured. You can't pull permits unless you're insured.
Okay, and so that's what you're trying to say, is that they're not going to have the ability to pull the permits, but they're going to be able to work and use their training and everything that they've done, as long as they maintain their training and everything they've done. But this terminology, you think this terminology, uninsured, like that just feels like a strange name for it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Somewhat. So in the craft, we know that the folks that don't have an active license are typically, so it's not, it's strange maybe to the real world, but the folks that are in the profession know that if a person doesn't, if they've shelved their license, that was because of more than likely the insurance and not having to pay the insurance. So it's not strange to the folks that are within the industry from that standpoint. Typically, you'll have a job, so let's say it's 300 electricians. On that job where it's a hole in the ground, it'll probably be at least 60, 70 electricians on that job. There's only one person that needs to be the master electrician, one permit that's pulled, and everybody else is working under that permit for that company, whoever gets that job.
Okay, and so therefore, they wouldn't be necessarily carrying the insurance and stuff like that, but still have the ability to do the work, but under the supervision of that person who has the insurance and is the master electrician.
So, for example, because we have 2,000 electricians in Local 24. So when you think of that 70 people that may be working in that hole in the ground about 6, 7 months from now, let's say 50 of them are just journeyman electrician, which is what I am. But there may be 10 or 15 of them that was always master electricians working for that company. Those folks are just in the sphere where they only have those two options. So it's not something that's not unnormal for a person with a inactive master's license to be working next to a person that's just a journeyman electrician.
Thank you.
Yeah, Senator Carrozza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator McCrae. We have worked on these issues in the past. As you know, I have a very active three-county group, and whenever there's any changes, they just want to understand what the impact might be, and we did have to work through some issues. So I appreciate that. My question is for actually Kevin O'Keefe, who we've also been working on to expand the apprenticeship program at Warwick Community College. And when I contacted my local electrician groups in each county last night about the revisions to this bill, they were fine with it, but it also kind of prompted some other questions that it sounds like we may need to follow up on with not only the apprenticeship, but then also, Senator McCrae, I wanted to bring to your attention that some of them were asking about, and we might have to follow up with the Department of Labor, that they made their application but have not, received their licenses. So I know that the Department of Labor was involved in these emails last night, so it was flagged for them. But do either one of you, tied to this bill, just on how we kind of keep the process moving for, our local electricians?
So I've been working with folks because I'm in the profession, so they were getting about 300-some applications a day. So as the deadline, for folks that had worked on this with us, there was a deadline December 31st. So if you have went through an apprenticeship program, you automatically can get your journeyman's license. You just need to submit a copy, and they have records through Department of Labor. But if you didn't go through a traditional apprenticeship program, December 31st was the deadline in order to get your journeyman's license. So they were having a big influx. What I've been encouraging folks and what I've been told by Director Bull was make sure that they paid the $15 fee, submit the information. As long as they did that, the agency would be working with them. But they did acknowledge like there's a heavy strain because December 31st was the deadline. Yep.
No, I mean, we just think this, we realized that this seems simple in some ways, but it's been very complicated. And this, last year, we had legislation that was clarifying. This year is clarifying. And like, the local boards are very active and electricians are active, so neither are shy about expressing concerns, so. But we support this, because this is common sense that people that have the ability and the talent can still work. Instead of being a master, they can work as a journey person.
My only request would be if maybe we can improve those communications with the locals whenever there's any kind of change. Like, this is fine, but it usually opens up the whole history of this.
Right.
So if we can just clearly communicate to those, thank you.
Whatever we can do, we will.
Thank you.
Okay, any additional questions for any of the panel? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Senator McCray. And, oh, I'm sorry, Senator Washington can see you.
Thank you. Just to help us, what are the different level, I should say, so there's the Board of Electrician Examiners, so to speak, there's a statewide board that sets the standards. Is that correct?
It's a
Yeah.
statewide board,
Right,
yes,
right.
ma'am.
And so are there also local boards? Because I'm just trying to understand the exchange between it. So there's local boards?
So the local boards are where, like, you can pull your permits and things of that nature.
Okay. Now, but local boards don't have anything to do with licensure?
They did at one point prior to the legislation.
Okay, so now, so what do those boards do now? Like,
We worked it out with MACO where they would still be able to recoup the fees that they had accumulated off of licensure, and we called it registration. So you still have to register with those respective local jurisdictions to be able to keep the resources that they had coming into their respective jurisdictions.
so if you are an electrician and you want to work in a particular county, you have a state license, but then you also have to register in a different county?
Not exactly.
Yeah,
So
help me
the
with that.
ones, everybody has to come under one umbrella, which is the state now. So we have a uniform system. But the master electrician, so you have an apprentice,
That's what
you
I-
have a journeyman, and you have the master electrician. The master electrician is the only one that can pull permits, which they also have to be state and they have to be local.
So you're trying to create something between the master, who can pull, so a master can pull? A master who is active, like that they're insured, they can pull a permit?
Yes, ma'am.
And then a journeyman, is that the highest level?
No, that's the middle.
Okay, all right, so it goes apprentice, journeyman, and then master.
Yep.
All right, so you're creating something between the apprentice and the journeyman, or between the journeyman and the master?
So the folks that have shelf license, which we call inactive.
Right.
They are master electricians. So
okay.
they can't award, they can't say, hey, we're going to give you another license. They already have a license, it's just inactive. We're creating a classification
Below
where
there,
these
okay.
folks in the middle
Okay.
are still working as journeymen. They're not as master electricians,
Got it.
not doing the duties of a master
Okay,
electrician.
because I was just, I think, following the questioning of Senator Augustine and trying to come up with a word that conveys that middle space without the uninsured word. Okay.
This was working with the agency to come. The most important thing that we could do is just address the classification piece of it, and hopefully doing that this year. And I say that again, Senator Washington, because I gotten a number of phone calls, and some of the phone calls went like this: Corey, why am I being penalized? I did everything that was right. I tried to elevate my career. I went and got this extra degree. It's like maybe getting another college degree or a master's instead of a bachelor's. And now I'm left in limbo and I have to go back and activate this piece of it. So
Right.
that was how a lot of
I
those conversations
like
went.
what to do. It's just we see all the boards, and so there's sort of a standard just way that the titles come. And so it's probably something, there would be something like a Master 1 or Master 2. So that's all, because you're not, I was trying to be clear that you weren't creating a brand-new license. They have the same qualifications as the master, except they're not able to pull permits.
Because they don't have insurance.
Right, so, okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks.
Okay, any additional questions for the witnesses, the panel? Okay, seeing none, that does conclude the bill hearing on Senate Bill 44, and we're going to now turn to Senator Kagan for Senate Bill 30. And we've got some in-person sponsor panelists and some virtual, but we're going to, I'm going to call up Brian Roberts, Susan Greentree. I don't know if Quentin Askew is here, but if Quentin Askew is here, that will be part of the in-person sponsor panel. And we also, after they testify, we do have two folks, virtual sponsor panelists as well, but we'll take them after we're done with this panel. So Senator Kagan, you lead off with Senate Bill 30, and then we'll go to the witnesses.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
is it possible to change the order so that one of our virtual people goes after me, but before the rest of the gang?
That's fine. In
If
fact,
that's
maybe
okay.
we could do the two virtuals, and then we'll go to the
I
in-person.
think that might be helpful, actually, to the committee.
Okay, well then, why don't you lead off, and then we'll pipe in your
Perfect.
your virtuals
Perfect.
as well.
Thank you
Okay,
so
go on.
much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, for the record, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. I try to be really succinct in hearings. I can just warn you that this one is a big bill, and I'm going to take a little bit of time because it's really important. Because Public Service Commission legislation is new to this committee, and there are several of you who are new to this committee, you may not have heard me say this as many times as I have said it, which is 3 people have died in my district when 911 has failed. And when 911 fails, people die. For the last 8 years of my life, I have worked on issues related to 911. And today I'm bringing legislation to create a statewide 311 system. Now, on the floor today, we moved with our very first Senate bill, and that was additional funding for 988 for crisis and suicide attention, emergencies, and with all huge respect for Senator Augustine, the President Pro Tem, for his leadership on this issue. 911 is a 3-digit number that every child is taught from the youngest ages. And we all assume that if, God forbid, grandma's having a heart attack, if the house is literally on fire, or if a bad guy has just burglarized your home, that you're going to dial those 3 digits and a trained person will answer quickly and dispatch police, fire, or paramedics. But that's not always the way it works. So we have been working to move Maryland towards next generation 911. And the folks at this table have been a part of a very large commission that I have chaired. It's been one of the biggest honors of my life. We have passed 12 bills in Maryland that has put Maryland at the forefront nationally in shifting and upgrading to next gen 911. We have gotten national attention, and yet there is more to do. More to do. And I will have 911 bills that may come here, some may go to the Finance Committee, we'll see. But today the conversation is about 311. And I just want to flag for you that over 4 years, each year, we released an annual report, and I think I have sent them, many of them, to a lot of you, but the new folks might have seen them if you are interested. They go back and they are quite detailed. And we have addressed everything from funding shortages to staffing, recruitment, training, and retention, to cybersecurity, to diversity, to mental health issues, and so much more. The commission also multiple years endorsed strongly and enthusiastically the creation of a statewide 311 system. And I'm going to explain why and what that means. So first off, around the country, there's a call that comes in to 911 every 7 seconds. And 1 or 2 of those are not emergencies. They're not worthy of police, fire, or paramedics. So they can be phony calls, which are swatting, which Senator Waldstreicher and I have been working on when someone dials in a phony call that ends up instigating an emergency response, and that's wasted, or people just don't know who else to call. The reality is that there may be people who don't have Wi-Fi, or it's out in an extreme weather situation, or they don't speak English, or they can't navigate the website, maybe because of disabilities, maybe because of lack of access to a computer, or lack of Wi-Fi in their neighborhoods or in their communities. Or navigating government websites can be hard. They don't know whom to call. And right now, in all but 6 counties, they tend to call 911. In 6 counties, Baltimore City, which was the very first 311 center in the country that was established on October 2nd, 1996. In Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Anne Arundel County, and St. Mary's County, they can call 311. And whether they are a resident, a tourist, or a traveler, they can get the assistance they need. What day is my recycling getting picked up? There's a tree that fell that's blocking my driveway. Where can I get a COVID test? Just really basic government questions. They don't know where to get the answer, but it's not through 911. Currently, 311 in those 6 jurisdictions, the 6 governments are hiring the people, training the people under the headset, pulling together the knowledge and the resources, paying for the cost of all the equipment. The 311 system that we are proposing to set up would create a statewide system that the counties would opt into. They cannot opt out. They would start off being in, if any of the 6 counties want to keep paying for it themselves and overseeing it themselves and paying for the computers and the phone equipment and the salaries and stuff, they could keep doing that. But we expect that most of them would be delighted to take it off the system and take it off of their bottom line and to have a statewide system. I want to give a shout out to Secretary and renominated Secretary Russ Strickland and Anna Sierra, his deputy at MDEM, which used to be an agency. I think you all know that. That's now a cabinet-level department because of the importance of their work. The Maryland Department of Emergency Management would oversee and be the base of support for the 311 system. It would be overseen, supervised, and regulated by a 311 board that would be very similar and is modeled on the existing 911 board. And for those of you who may not be familiar with our 911 board, a lot of the legislation that we have passed over the years has been in support of their work. They distribute the funding that helps keep your 911 centers in our 24 counties well-funded with the best equipment, the hardware, the software, and because we have shifted so much of the overhead to the state now, the counties have a lighter load, and they just pay for the personnel. And the state pays for mostly everything else to keep your 911 systems going and operational. It has been my privilege to now visit 20 of the 24 911 centers around the state and to personally thank our 911 specialists, the courageous women and men under the headset. Their jobs are impossible. They answer the phones on what is someone's most awful day. And Sue Greentree is here. She was under the headset in Anne Arundel County for more than 30 years. And they don't know what they're getting, but it's going to be hard. It's going to be awful. And we don't thank them enough. We don't recognize them enough. They burn out. They have PTSD. That is not the purpose of this conversation. But one of the importances of aspects of 311, sometimes they need a break. They can provide mentoring and role modeling and support at a 311 center. There may be someone who is ready for 311 to answer non-emergency questions, but isn't quite ready to shift to be under the headset at a 911 center. So they can collaborate, they can cross-communicate, and they can work together. One of the witnesses today, and I'm so grateful, is Bill Ferretti, who for many, many years was a Montgomery County 911 director. Steve Souter, who was my vice chair, who has worked in 911 for over 60 years in various jurisdictions, and they will both be testifying. Also, Sean Looney, who most of you know, who is one of the most respected advocates in Annapolis. He was on this commission and helped us talk through some of the technical telecommunications issues. One of the things that's really important about 311 is the confusion that may happen, especially in the early years. In your system, in the folder, and I will hold it up here, but that's not going to be great, I realize that, is a folder, is a chart of when to call 211, 311, 911, and 988. It's a lot of different three-digit numbers, and so there needs to be an educational program, as there needs to be for 988, because people don't yet know about it. That would be expected for 311 also. But they also need to cross-connect. So if someone calls 311 and it turns out to be an emergency, it needs to be able to be transferred to 911. Similarly, if someone calls 211 and it's not the right number, they just all need to communicate together. Sean Looney can speak to some of that and how easy it is to have that seamless transition. Cost is the only question that anyone has about this, because this is fundamentally important. This is about customer service. This serves every single resident or tourist in the state of Maryland that just needs help, has a question about, and needs to access government and doesn't know how to do it. So funding, I want to give a lot of shout outs because it takes a community to pull together an issue like this. Congressman David Trone has been supportive and engaged on this issue for several years now. His excellent staff has been working with us. And I think many of you may know that he was appointed to the Appropriations Committee. I have also talked to the national head of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and she, yes, it's a woman, first ever, and she is supportive of the concept of a statewide 311 system. There are 34 states that have counties or cities with 311, a total of 87 cities, 16 counties, 22 Canadian provinces, plus Panama, Puerto Rico, Costa Rica, and others. It is important, and it is time. So let me just speak to the money, and then I will start to wrap up because I have excellent witnesses. But there's a lot that I want to talk to you about here. So it's not cheap. We're talking about setting up an entire statewide system. We're talking about it not being in 24 jurisdictions, so we're not doing 24 new office spaces. We're talking about a couple of locations. They would be co-located, at least one of them would be co-located with MDEM at their jurisdiction, so the crisis communications and access to government could easily partner. And in some jurisdictions, they are co-located already, 911 and 311, so that's easy. But we leave a lot to MDEM to figure out. We trust their leadership, we trust their process, and again, the 311 board, which would be made up of the community that would be served by this. And among those that would be serving on the 311 board would be the Secretary of MDEM and his or her designee, the Secretary of DO-IT, the Department of Information Technology or designee, Aging, Disabilities, Health, Budget and Management, Department of General Services, the Office of the Governor, then telecom experts, cybersecurity experts, and many more. That parallels the 911 board, and they would make regulatory and policy decisions. On page 11 of the fiscal note, our fiscal analyst, who did a great job. I thought it's very comprehensive, takes issue with the estimate that my friends at MDEM came up with and thinks that it would be less expensive than they guessed. And so I want to flag for you that, as I said, it's not cheap. It's a statewide system. Today, for 988, we voted for $12 million. And that's just for those in crisis. This would serve everyone. It's $2 million to set up the website because we want it to be accessible just on the website if someone doesn't want to make the phone call. And that's in FY24. It rolls out over successive years in FY25, 6, 7, and 8, but it is lower than MDEM is guessing, according to our own fiscal analysts. And again, I mentioned Congressman Trone, and he is committed to working with me and with us to get federal funds for this. And I am optimistic that we can get at least a chunk, if not all of it. From the federal perspective, that's kind of chump change, is what they're looking at. I want to flag that there are a couple of minor amendments, Mr. Chairman. One is at MDEM's request, we pushed all of the deadlines back 1 year each to give them a little bit more time to roll this out. Second, there was a technical piece in there that referred to 911 and doesn't belong in a 311 bill, so we excised that. I also thought it was important to make clear that 311 must be accessible to people with disabilities. And the last thing is it must be accessible to people who need language access. So we use the language line for 911 calls. We need to make sure that people who are speaking other languages other than English, also have access to 311 support. So I am happy to take lots of questions afterwards. I've been working on this bill a very long time. And again, I know that I went on long, but I did want to make sure you had the context because this is a really important initiative. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd love to toss it to Bill Ferretti, unless there are questions for me first.
Before we do that, and then you identified 3 people who actually are in the queue virtually, see, and at your request, you wanted to go virtual before.
If you wouldn't mind, that would be great.
That's fine, but before we do that, I would like to ask the committee if you've got any questions directly for the sponsor. Yes, Senator Gallion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. So just a quick question. Since it's different than the 911's emergency.
Correct.
This is definitely non-emergency. So you could have people calling from everything from a pothole in the road to a tree overgrown and the wire's a little too far and all that. When you looked at this bill and researched it, did you look at, for stuff like this, don't most people just like do a Google search instead of having to call a number? Don't most people normally just research it online? That's my question. It's
a great question, so thank you, Senator Gallion. There are a lot of ways to answer that. First off, a Google search might end up with this many answers, right? So let's say I don't speak English. Let's say I don't have a computer, and so I can't do a Google search. Let's say I'm having a power outage, there are a lot of reasons why a Google search really isn't an option. And so whether there's not broadband nearby, or again, if there's a power outage, there are 3 possibilities when you call 311. One is they answer your question right away. Your recycling is going to get picked up tomorrow. Answer, done. Here's where you can get a vaccine, done, all that. The second is it can be referred to someone else. And I hate using the B word, the bureaucracy, because it's often used as an insult, but government can be hard to navigate. And we might know the right person to call, but the average person probably doesn't. Which department and which person within each department, they get transferred 4 times, they get put on hold, they get someone's voicemail, there's a disconnected number. It's hard, and it's frustrating, and then they get dispirited, they get frustrated, and government sucks, right? And that's how people get so, it's not my words, but that's when people get frustrated, and then they call us, and they, or don't, because they don't even know that we're there to help them. So the second thing is that we don't have the information right now about fixing your pothole, but I can fill out a claim form, I can fill out an order form and pass that on to the right person in your county, and then they will circle back with you. And then the third possibility is, holy cripes, this is an emergency, and we're going to transfer you to 911. So there are 3 ways that we can handle your call, And all of those are important, and they will all serve Marylanders. Thank you for the
Senator
question.
Lewis Young, and we do have some excellent witnesses right behind the sponsor, but Senator Lewis Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You acknowledged the rather extensive fiscal note. Unfortunately, the way our fiscal notes are constructed, they never look at corresponding revenue-generating opportunities, or in this case, cost savings elsewhere. Yes. Do you have any way to estimate the corresponding cost savings that would be generated from offloading calls to 911, local government, and emergency responses that are very expensive?
It's such a great question. Thank you, Senator Lewis Young. So Brian Roberts is going to be able to speak about cost saving in Montgomery. Kevin Canale may be able to talk about it with a statewide perspective, but there is a cost savings, and you're right, it isn't necessarily reflected. I can tell you for the 6 counties that currently have 311, the only thing that the counties would have to do is have knowledge managers. And that's what we've called them in the bill, if you guys want to rename them or whatever. But those are the people who can make sure that the 311 specialists would have access to the recycling day pickup or the vaccine locations or all of the information that people may be calling in about, so they can give people the answers quickly if possible. And again, as I said, the option 2 is then take a ticket, basically, and follow up. But there is cost savings in addition to the cost investment. And again, I'll let some of my colleagues talk to that. Thank you for the question.
Okay, any additional questions for the sponsor before we go to the virtual witnesses? Okay, seeing none, let's start with Bill Ferretti. Hopefully he's in the queue. William Ferretti. We've got 3 virtual. Okay, Bill, I see you there. Mr. Ferretti. You've got 2.5 minutes as part of the sponsor panel to testify, so you're on the clock starting now, okay?
Thank you, Chair Feldman. It's an honor to be before the committee and committee members. Thank you for allowing me to appear. I really want to follow up on the Senator's great introduction to this bill. 311, when it was created by the federal government under the North American Numbering Plan, was set up with 2 different and distinct functions, both to operate as a government services number or as a police non-emergency number. And throughout the country and in Maryland, we see it taking different flavors. In Montgomery County, where I was the director of 911 prior to my retirement, 311 takes the form of a government services number. And I know Brian Roberts will speak more to that. In Baltimore City, it is the entry point to both police non-emergency and government services. And that's the model we think would be most beneficial throughout the entire state. I want to build on some of the examples that the Senator gave on inappropriate calls to 911. And it's very well-meaning citizens who see something or walk out in the morning and their car was hit overnight in an accident. It's not an emergency, but they don't know the non-emergency number and they're frustrated. So what do? They just default to what they know, what they've been taught as a child. They call 911. And ultimately, that call, yes, would end up in a public safety answering point, a 911 center, should be a non-emergency call. If 311 was the universal number, then that citizen now knows that also. Hey, for this type of call, I can just call 311. And whether I'm the resident of that county or a visitor, that would be universal throughout the state of Maryland. So instead of having different forms, it would all take one form. A couple other key points here is there are definitely going to be economies of scale that can be achieved because instead of having potentially 24 different back-end systems, you're having one statewide system. The routing, which was allow calls to be handed off between the 911 systems and the 988 systems, is key and is included in the overall standards. And then the last point is, in the world of cyber attacks that we live in, the bill mandates that the system must be very robust and have resiliency and survivability so it is there on those when those terrible acts happen and people attack our systems, whether it be the system itself or the power grid associated with it, the system will be able to stay up. And I appreciate the opportunity to testify and ask for more.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Ferretti before we go to the next virtual witness? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Bill Ferretti, for that testimony. We're next going to go to Steve Sauter. Mr. Sauter, hopefully you will be able to zoom in and turn your audio and video on. Okay, Steve, we see you, and you've got 2.5 minutes to testify.
Senator Feldman and committee members, good afternoon. Steve Sauter, former chair of the 911 Commission.
Vice Chair,
and
Vice
proud-
Chair, Vice Chair.
Vice Chair, I beg your pardon, Senator. I really do appreciate the opportunity to be here. Many of you remember this bill was before you last year. It was unsuccessful. And sometime in the fall of last year, Senator Kagan drew the committee together and talked about the future and what we might want to think about sponsoring in the upcoming session, which is where we are now. And without hesitation and unanimously, the commission members said 311. And the reason for that is that we believed in it back then. We believe in it more now. And we liken it in somewhat to the degree of 911. In 1979, 44 years ago, in the 385th session of the General Assembly, this body voted for 911 across the state of Maryland. There were people at that time that were enthusiastic and others that were doubters. Some were walking the tightrope. They didn't know. It was all new. But 911 was agreed to, and it became the most successful number in the United States of America. That is because of the vision that Maryland had for yet an untried number. That same opportunity is before you today. When the issue a moment ago came up about people doing this work somewhat already scattered around the 24 counties, quick math at 20 departments per 24 counties comes up to 480 people. Some counties have more departments, some less. But generally speaking, there's 480 people answering the phone every day in their respective department and trying to field these calls. This makes it much, much more contemporary, much, much more fluid and transparent and easy to navigate for the public. And the senator did a great job in explaining the frustration that is often experienced by citizens when they try to communicate. So for that, I would ask you to please reconsider this again in this session. I would love for us again to look into the future and say that this was a defining moment for 311 in Maryland. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Any questions for Mr. Sauter? Okay, seeing none. We do have just one other virtual witness, and I'd like to maybe try to get him on, and then we can go back to just pure in-person. Is Sean Looney? We can connect Sean Looney on here. Mr. Looney. Sean, we do see you, and you've got 2.5 minutes to weigh in favorably.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great to see you and the committee, and especially you, Mr. Chairman, in your new role. Congratulations on that. I worked for Indianapolis since about 1994, worked on a lot of different issues, and this issue is one of those issues I'm most proud of. I learned a lot about 911, but especially the people that work in the business, the people under the headsets, as they say. And Senator Lewis Young had the excellent question about cost savings. And yes, anytime you offload a burden on one network and put it on another, that helps that existing network. And we talk about resiliency. One of my biggest takeaways working on this issue is the resiliency of the people that work under those headsets, that take these calls in the most brutal conditions. And I think anything we can do to make their jobs easier and help them do the jobs that they're trained to do and focus on emergencies, that's going to help the entire system. And, creating this statewide 311 system will only make the 911 system better. And the last thing I'll say is I kind of regret not being in Annapolis right now because I see all the amazing change with the new governor, new controller, new treasurer. It's an amazing change. And I think this is an opportunity for Maryland to step up and be the first state in the country to have a statewide 311 system. And I think there's just this breath of fresh air in Annapolis right now. I think this is the right time and the right opportunity to take advantage of that and lead the country in setting up the first statewide 311 system. I encourage you to do that. I urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Looney. Any questions for the witness? Okay, seeing none, we're going to thank you for your testimony. We're going to now go to in-person, the panel. Is Mr. Roberts, Brian Roberts, right there? Mr. Roberts, why don't you lead off? 2.5 minutes.
Okay. Good afternoon. All the way close. Oh, I can hear it now.
Yep.
All right. Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. I am Brian Roberts. I am the Program Director for Montgomery County 311, and I am obviously a big supporter of SB 30, and I'm glad to be able to speak about it. I'll just tell you how 311 works in Montgomery County. We take about 40,000 calls a month for 6 major departments: environmental protection, housing, health and human services, transportation, permitting services, and taxes. And that's about 80% of that 40,000 number. And we do this with 40 folks budgeted on the phone, managed by a team of 4 supervisors and a call center manager, and supported by knowledge managers, a couple of knowledge managers, and a couple of trainers, and one sort of all-purpose IT data analyst. So it's a relatively small team to handle that volume of work, and we're also working very diligently on making the operation more efficient all the time. And so customer satisfaction is very much in our minds, and we're performing at about 88-89% customer satisfaction right now, and we'd like that to be a little bit higher. So one of the questions that came up earlier was about cost savings. When we developed 311 in Montgomery County in 2009, we saved about $10 million. That came from a variety of sources, but mainly it was allowing other folks in the departments to spend more time on their job rather than answering customer calls. So the numbers will be different at a statewide level, and obviously a lot of years have passed, the technology has changed, but I think it will be very, very helpful to a lot of people, and looking forward to seeing how it goes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Roberts. We'll go through the panel, and then we'll open up questions. We've got Susan Greentree. Why don't you go next, Ms. Greentree?
Okay. Okay, am I close enough?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Chairman and Senators. My name is Susan Greentree, and Maryland needs a statewide 311 system. 911 centers are already dangerously understaffed and inundated with non-emergency calls. When there are breaks and watermelon breaks, people are having animal or complaints, abandoned vehicles, they're dialing 911. There's a handful of counties, as we've seen, with systems that seem to be working very well right now, but there's nothing clear across the state. I worked for Anne Arundel County 911 for 35 years, with multiple 911 calls coming in when a call taker or a 911 specialist answers a 911 call and it's a non-emergency call. They put that customer on hold and move to the next call because that one may be an emergency. One, that's not good customer service on this end, and the other side is that if your family member is having an emergency and you're dialing 911, you're wondering why nobody is answering that call for you in an expedient way. Many of us maybe recall the incident last year that made the news where there was a young child having a seizure, difficulty breathing, and their mother was several minutes getting a hold of 911.
Do not shower yet?
A statewide system would enable all Maryland residents to call 911 for non-emergency and county and city services. 911 specialists would be able to answer 911 calls, emergency calls, in a faster manner, and residents dialing 911 would get an agent who could best handle their concerns. Lastly, I'd like to say that my entire career, the national standard for
and it's a standards-based organization that determined it, for answering 911 calls was 10 seconds, 90% of the time. In 2020, it was changed to 90 seconds within, 90% of the calls within 15 seconds, 95% of the calls within 20 seconds, basically due to the increased call volume and staffing shortages within 911 agencies consistently unable to reach that threshold. So the standard was lowered. Maryland 911 Board and PSEP directors discussed it and was determined that Maryland would continue to go with 10 seconds for 90% of the calls in the state of Maryland. We did not think that it was appropriate to change it. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Greentree. And Kevin Canale, you're not designated as part of the sponsor panel, but you look like you should be, so therefore you are next. 2.5 minutes.
That is completely fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Kevin Canale here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in strong support of Senate Bill 30. You've heard great testimony. I think Senator Kagan has outlined the bill very well. The bill is comprehensive, but that's a really good thing because the product before you is the product of multiple stakeholder input, very, very smart people around the table representing everyone you can think of that should be represented when coming up with a bill like this. So the product that you have is the result of a lot of work and a lot of dedication, and I commend everyone here today and all the countless others that worked on the commission and in developing this bill. You've heard that several counties do have a 311 system. We think that this bill should be statewide. We want to promote equity across the state. From Mountain, Maryland to Worcester County, people should have these features available to them. We want to make sure that all of our residents can access these services. You've heard about diverting, calls that are going to 911 that are not emergency calls. That is very important. I can tell you it happens all the time, and it just creates a lot of confusion. It creates potentially very dangerous circumstances for people who are experiencing emergencies and may not be able to get through right away. I also want to talk about efficiency, both within government and for the residents that we serve. I think this bill creates that standard across the state, and that's a very good thing. We don't want to duplicate efforts. Making this a statewide system makes a lot of sense, making sure that people understand the differences between 911, 311, 211, all the different three-numbered numbers that you can call for assistance is crucial. This bill does that. And giving the bill to MDEM, giving the implementation and the ensuring that this is working well to MDEM makes a lot of sense. They have the expertise. That board that Senator Kagan spoke of earlier, fantastic way to do it. That makes sure that, again, the same experts that worked on this bill and crafted the piece of legislation in front of you are continuing to have input throughout the process and making sure that things are working as they should. So for all those reasons, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, we'd ask for a favorable report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions for any of the panelists? Senator Simon Eyre.
Thank you. A very good presentation. This is one I believe was in finance, so it's new
Exactly.
to me. So I have just a couple quick questions. I understand the finances, and that's a whole separate issue there. So one is you said there was phony calls and those who just didn't know who to call, and it was like 1 or 2 per 7. So maybe the question's to Brian Roberts, if that's the correct name. How did that affect when you put 311 in Montgomery County? How did that affect the phony or the ones not supposed to be going to 911? What was the rate after it became implemented?
Well, very good question, and I think we were able to differentiate between, what we were able to do at 311 and 911, first with an aggressive advertising campaign initially. And, so what happens today is we get very few emergency calls on our end, and I think it's certainly reduced the number of non-emergency calls that go, or the wrong directed calls that go to police. It's been very, very effective that way. And we get 40,000 calls a month, so people have figured out how to reach us and not to call 911 for those items.
Okay, if you could follow up afterwards, and if you could reach out to 911, I'm just curious to find out what the reduction was on the 911 side in Montgomery County.
Sure, we can get you that data.
And then just two quick additional ones. You said there was $10 million savings, and I like savings, everybody likes savings. So people could do their work instead of answering these calls. So how did you realize that $10 million? Was that a reduction in staff? Or, I mean, where did the savings come in?
So there were equipment and people that were dedicated to customer service in departments that didn't have to do that anymore. So some of those folks, stayed with the county and did something else, but some of those jobs went away when, through attrition or whatever. So it's that kind of thing.
Okay, I'll give you an easy one, the last one. Just for my own knowledge, what are like the top 2 reasons people call this new number 311?
In Montgomery County, it's trash and recycling. People want their grass clippings picked up. They want the trash from renovations hauled away. So they're very concerned when the trash doesn't get picked up on time. So that's number 1. And number 2 are social services.
Okay, any additional questions for this panel? Senator Washington.
So on that last bit, thank you, Senator Kagan, and thank you all for sharing information and your service. So for the social services, there's 211, right? Okay. So is social services, what's 211? Because I know a couple of years ago we've had big pushes for 211.
May I I'm gonna let Mr. Roberts answer. I just want to, Quentin Askew, who's the CEO of Maryland's statewide 211 system, submitted testimony. Unfortunately, it was late, but his mother had an emergency trip to the hospital, and so he wasn't able to be with us. He was scheduled to be here, and he is someone that we have collaborated with throughout this process on what can we learn from 211 as we're setting up 311, how can we collaborate, not step on each other's toes and all that. So with that, I just wanted to put that out there, and then, Brian, why don't you go from there?
The short answer is we don't use 211 in Montgomery County. So 311 handles the kind of calls that 211 handles everywhere else in the state.
I need a bed, I need food.
Yep. Yeah, so we had a lot of calls about Medicare, about SNAP, housing, emergency services, those kinds of social services. We handle those calls instead of 211.
And are other counties represented? Is 211, I'm sorry, I don't remember where you're.
I don't believe any other jurisdictions in the state do what we're doing in Montgomery County.
Statewide 211?
Yes.
We're having trouble with your mic there, yeah.
Can I try again? Oh, do we have a statewide 211? Yes.
We do.
Okay, so we have a statewide 211, statewide 911.
No.
No,
There
we're
are
proposing
24.
that.
No, there is not a statewide 911.
I know.
There is a 911 board that oversees it, but we have 24 county-based 911 centers, and they are all different but held to the same standards for training of the 911 specialists, for performance, and Sue Greentree very kindly talked about the NENA standards, the National Emergency Numbers Association, in terms of 90% of the time answering within 10 seconds or less. But I think you've all either had your own experience or have heard from constituents about being put on hold or getting voicemail or getting transferred, and so there is still room for improvement, but that's part of the problem, and that's part of why we need 311, because our 911 centers are understaffed, and our folks are stressed, and they are retiring, and we can't blame them.
Yeah.
But we desperately need them to stay, because they are saving lives and property every single day that they're under the headset.
Again, I'm trying to understand, because it's sort of new content. I mean, I voted on it, I've seen it. And we have 988. Now, how will 988 operate? I don't know if the.
So 988, and Senator Augustine can toss to this if you want, but that is a crisis and suicide hotline. It is not established. It just went live July 23rd of last year, 2022. And there are a lot of people who don't know about it, which is why we try to talk about it all the time. So I'm doing that now, 988, for the students behind us. But there are, I think, am I right that there are 4 There are 8. There are 8 centers, call centers, where those 911, 988 calls go to. And I know that there's one in Montgomery County. They are strategically located around the state, but they're not geographically, generally not geographically needed. So 24 counties, you know, if your house is on fire, you want the fire station that is closest to your home. So if you live in Baltimore City, you wouldn't want someone in Grantsville to answer the phone and try to get you a fire truck. So, but since 988 is also crisis management and not always emergency sort of dispatch, there are fewer centers, but they are trained people. Senator Augustine, is there anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I'm just, there's a lot of numbers, and I just want to understand. So if I'm driving through Howard County, because you listed the 6 counties that have 311 call centers at their city. So I'm from Baltimore, I'm driving through Howard County, I see a pothole, I dial 311. If I'm in Howard County, my 311 wouldn't connect to anything. Is that?
Right. Right? Yeah, wouldn't go anywhere.
And everyone, all the counties do have a 911. Okay, so if I drive, so I'll get the local 911. I know that your phone sometimes asks you that, right? Okay. So
you would get Howard County 911, hopefully, if you're not near a border, and therefore the interconnectivity would be a challenge. But let's say you get 911 for a pothole, which is not something that should be a 911 call, and then they would have to figure out how to navigate and how to refer you. But their goal, and maybe Sue wants to add to this, their goal would be to get you off the phone pretty fast, because the next call is someone who's witnessing a burglary or whose house is literally on fire.
And so the 311, so there are 18 counties don't have 311.
Correct.
Okay. So was there, and it looks like we could say it's our shore. You could say that it's Western Maryland. Was there any contemplation to start it like a regional, that could be a Southern Maryland one, and start that out as a 311 and see how that is, or Western Maryland? I'm thinking about how we rolled out broadband and how electricity is rolled out and just all these other utilities and services.
So obviously, it's the will of the committee, and if the committee decided that a regional pilot program would make the most sense, I'm not sure that it would, but I can tell you that that there are some counties that use the 911 non-emergency line or the police non-emergency line. It's just really hard. How many of you guys know your county's non-emergency police number? I do, only because I went to the Citizens Police Academy and had it pounded into me, and I have it in my phone. I would venture to say that most of our constituents wouldn't know that number. And so in 18 jurisdictions, as you said, they would maybe be able to call that number and maybe get help that way, but not ideal. There's a delay, there's the frustration. And again, we are trying to re-energize, repopulate, and improve, enhance our government services, and this is fundamental government service.
For the jurisdictions that have their 311s, will the state, and I'm sorry, I didn't read as much detail, but would the state cover the expenses to update those programs to meet the requirements outlined, or?
This
will
is
the
really
counties-
important.
Will this be a shared responsibility of the
Yes,
counties?
great question, and this is really important, and Kevin can chime in too if he wants. Bill Ferretti can also chime in on this, but we spent a lot of time talking about this. So if Prince George's County says, we've got 311, it's working just fine, we are delighted to be paying taxpayer money and paying for it and hiring and supervising and updating our cybersecurity and our computer equipment, and we'll do it all, thanks very much, have a nice day, that's fine. Now, they would still have to do knowledge managers because they would still need to collaborate, with the statewide system. But they could keep paying for it, they could keep having their own system, they could keep having their office space and covering all of the expenses. they would be held to standards that would be set by the 311 board. So they couldn't kind of do it halfway. They would still need to do it well. I would venture to guess that the 6 counties that are doing it now would be delighted to say, you do it for us, you pay for it, we'll just help you and make sure you have the information about social services, about getting a vaccine, about figuring out when trash or recycling is getting picked up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Senator Gallion.
Thank you, and I want to thank Sue for your years of dispatching. So I've been on the other side of that as a near 30-year member in the volunteer fire service, past chief and all, and know what you all have to deal with. One thing that seems to have been an issue there a long time, as I looked at potential unintended consequences, it seems like there's always a shortage of 911 dispatchers.
Yeah.
So I guess my question would be for the gentleman from Montgomery County, with this way this works in Montgomery, when you're looking at, we have a workforce shortage, so to speak. So we're already short with 911 dispatchers, which to me is a priority because it's emergency.
Mm-hmm.
You're adding another layer here with 311. Would that be pulling from a different pool of potential employees, or could that inadvertently negatively affect the folks that may go to work as dispatchers for 911? So can you fill all these positions at both places in Montgomery, I guess?
I think so, because the profile and the skill set is a little different. And it would be interesting to talk to our colleagues in DC because they have both 911 and 311 in the same location and they cross-train. It'd be interesting to hear what they do. But in Montgomery County, they're separate, they're different job descriptions, and they're really different profiles. So it doesn't seem to be competition, keeping one from the other.
Yeah, I would just say that the cross-training that was just mentioned, I think is really important. And I think the idea here would be also to hopefully do some cross-training and, maybe you start in 311 and if you wanted to get into 911, you could do that. And this sort of creates a ladder. It creates an opportunity for people to be mentored. And then, of course, if you are cross-trained, you could then fill in if you had an issue where you didn't have a 911 specialist available or vice versa. So I think it creates some redundancy there and some resiliency in many respects. And I think that's really important when thinking about this bill overall.
I think the potential is to expand it because you might actually get more people interested in 911 if they knew there was an opportunity to take a break or to do something else in addition to, when they, taking on too much pressure. So I think there's an opportunity to expand
it. Senator Hester.
Thank you for this bill, Senator. You always do an amazing amount of really good work on 911. And so my question is, as we're thinking about the calls that come into 911 versus 311, I assume that you guys looked at some data, while you were, preparing the reports. Is there data that you can share with us about the number of calls that could be 311 calls, but that come to 988 instead?
Yes, so the National Emergency Numbers Association, I mentioned that there are 7 calls every second. I'm not even sure, I might have misspoken that. 7 911 calls every second nationally come into 911 centers, and of those, 1 or 2 are non-emergency. So that's a huge percentage, and going back to Senator Gallion, so we would be able to respond to 911 calls more quickly, efficiently, and effectively if we weren't getting random calls of there's a tree that fell in front of my driveway, because that's not an emergency. And Bill Ferretti talked about someone hit my car last night and I'm calling it in. They're not going to call police non-emergency. To them, it's an emergency. It's a crisis. It's just, it shouldn't be a 911 call.
Follow up, if I might. Is it a technical, we talked about the education, right? So now you have to educate people to
Yes.
call 311. Is there also a technical fix? Like if we put the 311 in place and we've got 988 and we've got 911, is there a way that it doesn't have to be a human? Like how do we do that? If people aren't going to be perfect.
Sure.
They're going to call
Absolutely.
911 and they need 988.
So we have the ability to do warm transfers. When someone calls 911, we get their phone number and their location. When they call 311, that information will not be available. But if someone calls 911 and it really is only a 311, that's going to be able to be transferred with that information to make that all go more efficiently. In terms of educating people, so we reduce the number of folks calling by the wrong number, Montgomery County has a wonderful visibility campaign, and you can't drive through Montgomery County without seeing 311's logo on the backs of the buses, on people's e-signature, in newsletters, in blast emails, on websites. So trying to get people to not call 911 and to choose 311 instead, which will be quicker and provide them the information by trained people with the information, but they are a different type of human that can deal with an imminent suicide or a baby who's not breathing.
Okay, any additional questions for the panel? Okay, seeing none, we do have one additional signed-up witness, Michael McKinney. Is Michael McKinney from your office?
I think that
Okay.
was just submitting a document. Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
right before you do the gavel, I just want to give a public shout-out to our colleague, our former colleague and my friend, our friend, Ed Riley. Senator Riley was my partner on 911 stuff throughout the 4 years on the commission, and it's important to make sure that everyone knows that 911 and 311 are bipartisan and inclusive, and he always talks about it, and I know I'm putting words in his mouth, but he said this so many times, I can quote him, which is that this is the most fundamental service of government. This is literally life and death. And if we can make our 911 centers function more effectively by creating a 311 to lighten the load, it's huge. So I'm grateful to all of you for your engagement and your thoughtful questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, colleagues.
That concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 30, and we're going to now turn to the next bill, also Senator Kagan, Senate Bill 35. And you don't have any special sponsor panel designated, so Senator Kagan, it's all yours. Senate Bill 35.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, for the record, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. This is a really baby bill, and I'm going to be so speedy. For years, Delegate Corman and I have brought bills about transparency. And before COVID, it seemed complicated and confusing. Now that we've somewhat survived the pandemic, everyone understands that government transparency is easy and affordable. We started with the Board of Elections and then kept expanding each year. We brought a bill to add more departments, more agencies, and this should be the very last one, and it applies to the Ethics Commission. And we think that they should be transparent as well. I'm just going to say a few things about it. First off, we put everyone in the same posture, which is that you post your agendas and meeting materials at least 48 hours in advance on your website. Second, during the meeting, you live stream the public portions of the meeting. And third, after the meeting minutes have been approved, within 48 hours, you post the meeting minutes on the website. The video is kept up for at least a year. The minutes are kept up for at least 5 years. That level of transparency and accountability is important. Now, the most obvious question with the Ethics Commission is a lot of the stuff they do is confidential. In no way does this limit them from going into closed session. There would be no expectation or desire, frankly, for that to be live streamed. It would be referred to. They went into closed session at 2:34 p.m. or something. So that's as much as would be in the minutes. So confidentiality would be maintained. The Ethics Commission has said that they have no problems with that. The only thing that they ask for in amendment is that they can get support in doing this from DOIT, the Department of Information Technology. So I think that's a baby bill. I hope I've explained it sufficiently and briefly, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Okay, any questions for Senator Kagan, sponsor? Okay, seeing none, we've got one witness in person and one virtual. Now, Michael McKinney, that was a mistake, so it's not him. We've got Rebecca Snyder from MDDC Press Association in person. So why don't you come up here, Ms. Snyder? You've got 2.5 minutes, and then we do have one virtual witness signed up favorable as well from the League of Women Voters of Maryland. So it's all yours, Ms. Snyder, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. For the record, I'm Rebecca Snyder. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland, Delaware, D.C. Press Association. I will not take nearly 2.5 minutes because, as Vice Chair Kagan said, this is an incremental sort of finishing of an arc of legislation that we have always felt was necessary. From the news media perspective, our reporters are looking at the meetings of public bodies. They rely on publicized minutes, and they rely on live streaming, and this is a logical next step, sort of just closing that loop in the arc of legislation that Senator Kagan has proposed throughout the years. So we urge a favorable report, and thank you for bringing the bill.
Okay, any questions for Ms. Snyder? Okay, seeing none, thank you for your testimony, and we're going to link in our one virtual witness, Nancy Soring from the League of Women Voters of Maryland, and there you are. Soring, you've got 2.5 minutes, starting now.
Thank you, Chairman Feldman and members of the committee. I will be very brief. I just want to say that the League has consistently supported Senator Kagan and Delegate Corman in their efforts to update and make consistent transparency requirements for more than 20 state agencies. This year, the State Ethics Commission is an important addition to these efforts. We welcome sunshine on the Ethics Commission because they're responsible for the administration of public ethics law, and among their duties are enforcing disclosure requirements of the financial affairs of public officials, setting standards of conduct for state and local government officials and employees, and they have an important role in guarding against improper influence on public officials. Therefore, we urge a favorable report on SB 35.
Okay, any questions for the witness? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 35, which takes us to our final bill of the day, Senator Brooks, Senate Bill 23, and we do have some designated sponsor panelists, and I'm going to call them up. We've got 4 seats or 3. Well, here I'm going to just reel off 4 names. We've got Jeff Guido, Charles Hayden, Bruce Bariana, who I saw earlier, do not see now, and former Senator Roger Mano. So why don't you all come up and populate the table. And Senator Brooks, you get to lead off unlimited time, Senate Bill 23.
All right, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of my August committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you on SB 23. For the record, I'm Senator Ben Brooks, representing the 10th Legislative District in Baltimore County. SB 23, that's heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration services for journeyman license qualifications. The purpose of this bill is to increase the licensing requirement for securing a heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration license, better known as HVACR, journeyman license in Maryland. Specifically, the bill increases the amount of training required from 3 years apprenticeship program and 1,875 hours to 4 years apprenticeship program and 6,000 hours, respectively. There are 2 pathways to earn your HVAC journeyman's license in Maryland. If you successfully complete a registered apprenticeship program, you automatically earn your license without sitting for the exam, as established by the Department of Labor and the Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Program, that's MATP. An apprentice must work 8,000 hours and attend 576 hours of related instructions to graduate and receive a journeyman's license. Otherwise, candidate must pass a written exam. The Maryland Department of Labor data shows that overall pass rate for HVACR license exam is 44%, indicating that many who are sitting for the test are not adequately prepared. HVAC technology has advanced over the last decade with increased energy efficiency standards, building codes, and safety regulations. This bill more closely aligns the licensing requirement in statute with those of the Registered Apprenticeship Program in trade, as well as other trades in the state. Furthermore, increasing the additional hours of training will ensure adequate safety and preparedness for the HVAC our workforce. For those reasons, I request a favorable report, and I have my panel here who can add some more context onto this matter. And I
Okay.
guess I'll start to my left.
Okay, well, since
Oh, well,
you-
I'll let you decide.
No, that's okay. Why don't we,
Yeah.
any questions for Senator Brooks, the sponsor, before we go to the three panelists? Okay, seeing none. Okay, I'll let
Okay.
you pick your order there, Mr. Sponsor. Who would you
Oh,
like to have go first?
Okay, let's go with Mr. Hayden.
Okay, we've
I mean,
got,
Mano, I'm sorry.
yes. Once a
Rum
senator,
Spring
always a
and
senator. We'll go with
Romeo.
Roger Mano, our former colleague. In the
Well, thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Firstly, we'd like to thank Senator Brooks for introducing this legislation. It's greatly needed. It increases apprenticeship training hours and the length of those of that training. I'm speaking on behalf of my clients, Steam Fitters Local 602, Plumbers Local 5, and the Mechanical Contractors Association of Metro Washington. There are 200 signatory contractors. This is greatly needed legislation. This industry is all about training. Folks who engage in work under this bill handle very dangerous materials under very dangerous conditions, high temperature pipes, high pressure gases. They work in facilities from power generating facilities to hospitals to large industrial manufacturing facilities, data centers, all the way to installing cooling systems at the top of offshore wind towers to keep those data processors at a specific temperature. The bill takes training from 1,875 hours to 6,000 hours and from 3 years to 4 years. We think that's a large step in the right direction. For the UA, the training runs from 8,500 hours to 10,000 hours, both classroom and in the field, and it's a 5-year program. To give you a sense of how vigorous that training is, at the end of 5 years, you can sit for the journeyman's exam. It's extremely well compensated. A first-year apprentice at Steamfitter 602, for example, will make about $48,000 to $50,000, including health care, full benefits. 5 years later, that apprentice will graduate to the journeyman journeyman level and probably makes six figures, $100,000 plus first year. May retire making upwards of $200,000 a year, full benefits, full pension, annuity, $500,000, $1 million, not uncommon. So they're outstanding blue-collar jobs, and the path to that success is vigorous training. So we believe that this bill is a step in the right direction, and we'd ask for a favorable committee report.
Okay, we'll go through the whole panel before we have questions. Mr. Guido, why don't you go next?
Thank you, Chair and Vice Chair and committee members. I'm Jeffrey Guido. I'm here on behalf of the Baltimore D.C. Metro Building Trades and Construction Council. We support Senate Bill 23. We think it's imperative to increase these training hours with the hours that are involved in learning the craft. It provides it under the direction of a master HVAC mechanic. It provides the individual with the proficiency and skill and working knowledge of the codes to safely install these systems for the public and private, safety and comfort of the public and private industries. And like as Roger was saying, for the plumber to sit for a journeyman exam is 7,200 hours under the direction of a master plumber. An electrician is 8,000 hours. There's a lot to learn in these crafts. 5 disciplines: layout, takeoff, support, install, and test. Underneath those 5 disciplines, there's a myriad of knowledge that is required, math-wise, the material, the tools that are required, and those types of things. Having the exam, the training exam, and the license protects the individual and the jurisdiction from outside, injurious, and unscrupulous competition, and that is good for the public. They're getting the bang for their buck when they're paying for these trained individuals to install these systems, and we ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hayden?
Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today for SB 23.
My name's Charles Hayden, and I'm president and owner of Hayden Mechanical Services, a full-service heating and air conditioning, refrigeration controls contractor. My company is based in Finksburg, Maryland. I'm a member of the Heating Air Conditioning Contractors of Maryland, HACC, and I also have been an instructor at the HACC Apprentice Program for over 7 years, as well as I'm the education chair. On behalf of HACC and 150 member companies, I respectfully urge the committee to vote in favor of the bill to ensure safety and preparedness of our industry. As a contractor and an instructor, my primary concern with the current requirements is that the candidates for a journeyman license only need to have completed a very limited number of hours, which is only 1875. This is actually just less than a year of actual working experience. In today's age, where understanding high-efficiency equipment, advanced technologies, and system design requires that hands-on time, my company recently, in the recent past, has hired 2 journeyman licensed technicians who actually took the test through the state of Maryland and was approved and received their journeyman. I re-enrolled them back into year 2 of the apprentice program for their limited experience. Our concern is that this is a systemic problem where candidates who meet the bare minimum requirements to earn their journeyman license are not prepared to be working in the field as journeymans. And even more candidates are failing the test because they don't have enough experience or training under their belts. Increasing the license requirements from 4 years to 4 years, holding an apprentice license for 6,000 on-the-job training hours, would bring them more in line with the current industry standards and needs. The Maryland Apprentice and Training Council, MATSE, already sets the standards for HVAC and our apprentice programs to include 4 years of education, and at least 8,000 on-the-job training hours. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comment, and I hope you'll consider advancing the bill forward. Thank you.
Okay, any questions? We've got Senator Carozza and then Senator Watson after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Brooks, for this bill. I just want to, one of my passions since my first year as delegate, it was brought to my attention the workforce shortage in the trades. And I represent the 3 lower shore counties. So I started to work very closely with employers and going into the technical high schools and trying to do more linkage to encourage students to take, to consider this pathway. I read the testimony of the Maryland Building Industry Association that they believe that that going from 3 to 4 years might discourage students who want to join these fields, but then I just heard Senator Mano talk about with all this training that might make you more attractive. So what I'm trying to figure out is maybe, knowing that sometimes when students here, it's going to take even, like, oh, well, that's the same as like a 4 years going to college or whatever it might be. Would there be any incentives or something with employers or something that if we want them, we want them to have this go from 3 to 4 to have more training, but maybe something that they wouldn't maybe throw up their hands and think, well, that's too long. I don't want to make that commitment. So trying to have it both ways.
Can I take that, please? Senator? Yeah, part of the training is also your CPR, your OSHA 30, so that you're safely working on these job sites. The other issue is the unionized crafts do not have a shortage of workers. We probably turn away 10 times more applicants than we can accept into the apprenticeship programs. But we are fully staffed, fully loaded to meet our employment needs because we start out with a good pay, benefits, your medical coverage is for you and your dependents. There are no exclusions. So we don't have a shortage of applicants or workers at all. So I think maybe if some of the other crafts or some of the other employers were to improve their game, they'd have a better retainment or because I know the was it MCCEI, the Maryland Center for Construction Excellence in Education, was addressing that issue several years ago. I was on that board, and basically it came down that the work was dangerous and dirty and low paying, why they weren't getting enough applicants coming in.
Well, with all due respect, I mean, the employers that I represent, are well-respected, well-run organizations, and they do have
No doubt
workforce
that.
shortages. So I was trying to see how, this bill, just again, trying to have it both ways, that we want, we're basically going for 3 to 4 years so that they're better trained, and then that they're better trained, and that's good for everybody. I'm also trying to just knowing how students think, are there some incentives with employers or something that it's like, well, this is going to be paid off, because of the track that you're on. So, and I really think it goes beyond, it's all employers. So.
Our apprenticeships are fully funded. There is no cost to the apprentice. Yes, sure.
Senator, my senator. I think part of the issue is with this specific bill and this scope of work, it's highly technical. There are craft trades that have shorter apprenticeship training programs that are not as rigorous. I think the reason for that is just the nature of this scope of work. You're dealing with hazardous materials under very high temperature and high pressure. There's no opportunity to mess up, right? The threat to that worker and to public health and safety is enormous, and that's why folks installing HVAC systems, high energy grid components need more training. I won't mention any other trades, but there are trades where you can become licensed with far fewer hours than if you are, for example, an IBEW or electrical worker or a steam fitter. Yep.
If I may.
Okay, why don't you just briefly, if you could.
Briefly.
Weigh in, and then we'll move on.
Really the 4 years, is it not? Within the 4 years, it's really bringing it up to current standards. So with the electrical programs and the plumbing programs, they're both at 4 years as well. Maryland, our HVAC program was established back in '96, which was a long time ago, with a lot of different technology that we have today. So this would just bring us more current into what's going on today. Yes? Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Senator Watson, and then we'll go to Senator Washington.
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen, for this, and Senator Brooks, I appreciate this. I had always wondered how your qualifications evolve to keep up with technology. And so I expect this is the kind of thing that would occur, not just for HVAC, for a variety of things. You had mentioned that you don't have a shortfall in the number of folks who are in the trades, but there is a gap in, not qualifications, but, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And exams.
All right, and you said that there was a need for additional training or more hours of training to make sure that folks can show that they are meeting qualification levels? Is that fair? And so,
Yes.
yeah. So where I'm getting at is, I just had this conversation with our county executive, and in Prince George's County, we have this public-private partnership where we're building like 6, 7 schools simultaneously. And the key was we always we have done for many, many years, have a student-built house where we bring the students in and they work with those journeymen and those folks who have the skill set to show them, bricklaying, masonry, carpentry, HVAC, plumbing, electricity, and those types of things. With the number of schools that we currently have, it seems like a great opportunity where you all can partner with our school system so that they have that training, but also take on a subset of our students who require that training as well, who want to get into trades, those folks that we know aren't going to college, but they know the value of the trades because the trades are a key source of millionaire makers, in the years to come. These are our future business owners, and we want to take full advantage of that. So I would love to be able to partner with you and see if we can connect you to that, because maybe we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. More opportunities for additional training with the folks that you have, while you're increasing the requirements to make sure they keep up with today's standards. Because we all know technology, you have to know existing technology until it becomes obsolete, as well as the new technology trends that are coming out, specifically with respect to things like electricity and those types of things.
I'd be happy to meet with you privately, Senator, and give you the full background of the last several years of our efforts to work with the Prince George's County Public Schools and public schools in other counties as well. We put $300 million on the table to renovate 30 schools with training, access, summer help programs, and we were not successful, and I think it had to do something with the flux of the hierarchy and the school board
Understand.
going back and forth, and that offer still exists.
Enough said. Thank you. I look
So
forward to
I'll be
talking
happy to
you.
meet with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, Senator Watson's a former member of the Prince George's School Board, so he can make it happen, I have no doubt. Okay, Senator Washington, you're next up.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator, for this bill, and learning a lot today. So you have both certification and licensing in HVAC. Is that right? So
We
there's
have licensing,
So in Maryland, do we just have licenses?
just
or do-
licensing in HVAC.
So one can't get certified for specific items within?
And not legally perform services in Maryland, no.
So that's why I'm trying to figure out the source of, you're sort of saying that there are other folks sort of coming in and perhaps presenting themselves as a licensee of some type. So in the District of Columbia, in DC, they have certifications.
Yes.
So the steam fitters in DC, their union, I'm just looking at, they have these different levels. They've got the type 1 for small appliances, type 2, type 3, type 4, but we don't have that in Maryland.
That's
Yeah,
probably
just help
referring
me,
to
yeah.
CFCs or
Yeah,
EPA
the
licensing.
APA. Right, and then they also, so they have apprenticeships, journeyman by waiver, so it looks like you don't have to take a test, and their hours are what you're asking for, it's like 8,000 hours. And then they have a journeyman by exam, which they say you require 3 years, and then there's the masters. Okay. So are all of these what we have in Maryland? So we have these 4 categories?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so you're saying that there's 44, so the journeymen that become licensed by taking an exam, only 44% of those folks are passing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So are these people going from apprentice right to take an exam and they haven't had any hours, or do you have to have a certain amount of hours to take the exam?
If I may.
Yes, please.
So in Maryland, you only have to have 1,800 hours, 1,875 hours. That's not education hours, that's strictly hands-on hours. So that apprentice could be working under a journeyman in the field for 1,800 hours, hold his license for 3 years, which there's over 2,000 hours in 1 year of usual working experience. So they can then submit to the state to take their test. And this is what we're finding, only 44% of the test takers are passing. So that's an incredible number because we feel like there's not enough education to go with it.
So who designs the exam? Because either there's something wrong with the exam, so we're seeing this in other, is there something wrong with the exam? Like, yeah, who does the exam? And is the exam the same across all the states?
The exam is the same across the states. I think there's a few different exams, but they're all on equal level for the most part.
And then how are you invited to become an apprentice? How does that process, how does that work?
Just apply.
Sign the bottom line.
So anyone that applies can become an apprentice, or is there some type of vetting?
Nope.
Oh, okay. So how do you earn your hours? How does one
You're
get?
employed.
Yeah.
So
Your employer provides your hours under the direction of the master.
So everyone who's an apprentice, so if 100 people apply, 100 people are apprentice, at some point, they decide they have to work you have to work for someone to be an apprentice, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so
Need a
once.
sponsor.
You need a sponsor, right?
Oh.
A
So
state
how do you-
registered apprentice.
So how do you get a
Right.
state
Yeah.
registered sponsor? How does that work?
HACC, we're state represented. I mean, we're recognized by the state as well as the union, I'm sure,
Right,
at the
we
same
are.
time.
So does
Our
it,
JTCs are
an
recognized.
individual, again, I'm just trying to understand, so an individual HVAC licensee adopts or picks up an apprentice, and allows them to get their hours. Are there apprentices that aren't matched and don't have an opportunity, or it's harder? Does that happen sometimes, or?
Well, I can speak for non-marriage shops. We're always looking for guys. We're always looking for people. I mean, and really, that's the number one thing we hear from all of the, our contractor members is there's not enough new employees coming into the industry. I'm at 51, I'm ready to retire out. All my knowledge goes with it, you know. It's a great trade, but we have a lack of people coming in. And of course, over the last 20 years, you know, I went to PG County, I went to Howard County, and over those years, we used to frown on trades, and everybody went towards computers, right? Now, we need them all back into the trades because we've got too many computer gurus, right? So we are definitely hurting for people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing that, again, there's parity, you want to be the same as other, the surrounding, I don't know what it looks like in Virginia, but, you know, if surrounding is 8,000 and we're at 1,850, but to jump to 3 times that's a lot. And then I am a little concerned about, and I just don't know the process of the apprenticeship. It seems like it's to the discretion of the journeyman to take an apprentice on and who's willing to train them. Is that, I mean, just want to make sure how the relationships.
You get hired and you go to work, say, you're going to go work with him.
Yeah.
And
but
you do what he tells
So
you to do.
an apprentice can't work in the state of Maryland without a journeyman.
Right.
Has
So
to
if
be
they can't
working
find- how do they
directly under a journeyman.
Okay.
So if
I'm-
an apprentice was to come on board, if I hired an apprentice, he will work for a journeyman for the next 4 years until he gets his journeyman license, and then he's able to go out and perform service or installs on his own.
But your profession makes sure that every single apprentice gets hired or gets someone. There's not anyone that's out there waiting because they haven't been able to find somebody to work with them. Because I'm worried about these hours, if we're increasing these hours, that if people aren't able to get into the line to connect for whatever reasons, I'm trying to understand that.
I can speak on behalf of my clients. The program's administered for the UA, and Jeff was president of Plumbers and Gas Fitters Local 5. They spend more than $10 million a year, those unions and the Mechanical Contractors Association, training apprentices. They don't ask for any state or federal money to do it. It comes out of the paychecks of hardworking workers. It goes back into, the union training programs. It's a not-for-profit situation. And there's more applicants than they can take. And that's another conversation. How much work is there out there? How much government work? How much private sector work? I think I can say with a pretty good degree of certainty that if you give us more work, we can hire a lot more apprentices.
Are there people who are not, that you're not representing, that also provide journeyman opportunity, like there's others that are not union shops that do?
There's the Plumbing, Heating, and Cooling Contractors Association, has a 4-year school for
got it.
plumbers and fitters.
Okay.
But the hours are still required, those are
Hey,
state
Jeff,
requirement hours.
Jeff, since we're being, you got to talk into the mic, otherwise I'm
I'm so sorry, I thought you could hear me. But yeah, there's the Plumbing, Heating, and Cooling Contractors Association, which some of our contractors are also members of. They have a 4-year apprenticeship school, but the state sets the hours required for the exam, not the unions or the open shops. Those are state-required hours. And on the waiver in the District of Columbia is only for the District of Columbia for plumbers and fitters. But you have to have a completion of certificate from a registered apprenticeship program to get the waiver.
Okay, well, thank you, guys. I don't see any additional questions of this panel. And the only other witness, I don't know if they're still here in person, signed up as Gerald Jackson. Is Mr. Jackson here?
I don't believe so.
Okay, and the only thing, also I will note that Senator Croza did make the point, there is written testimony unfavorable from the Maryland Building Industry Association. That's written only. So with that, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 23. And with that, that concludes the bill hearings. We are going to take a 5-minute break. to reboot our computers and all the like, and then we'll come back here because we want to exercise the muscle and maybe get a bill or two to the floor and show how, see how that works. In any event, we've got two small bills, and we'll take a break for 5 minutes, and then we'll do that vote. Thank you.